what we're typically shown, through various media outlets like, rom-coms or Disney, so notorious for this. When you see relationships, you typically see like the rainbows and sunshine fluffiness of relationships, right? And when you get into a relationship and you don't experience constant and consistent sunshine and rainbows, you think something is wrong and you get out of it, right? But I want to emphasize to you that without struggle, there's no progress. Frederick Douglass, what he was talking about, what he captured is what I was saying, is that it's a correspondence that happens, right? The same way that you go to the gym and you face resistance, like resistance bands or resistance training, whatever, to build muscle. In that same way, certain values and emanations of love, in order to get stronger in your charity or your patience, you have to develop that muscle, meaning that you have to face resistance. And so in your relationships, if you're experiencing times when it's not perfect, it's okay. It is perfect. Like, that's what perfection is. It's like not too much this and not too much that, but it's right. It's balance, right? That's what equality is. That's what perfection is. So you want to definitely experience that. And so the big thing I want to leave you with is the idea of going on that inward journey, right? The best way to really love someone and the best way to truly, I guess, interact in relationship with people in general is to have an understanding of who you are. I think when we understand ourselves better, like shout out to Howard Thurman in the inward journey, but when you understand who you are, your intricacies, your idiosyncrasies, and your nuances and stuff, and your darkness, your shadows, you start to have more compassion, more understanding for other people, right? It was Deepak Chopra who said this amazing thing. He was like, if you don't see your shadow, it means you're not standing in the light, right? You notice that when you're in darkness, you don't cast a shadow. When you're dark or blind to something, you don't, you feel like I'm fine. But when you step into the light, right, you start to cast a shadow, you start to see your shadow. The shadow of a person is the darkness of that person, right? People are 360 degrees, but what Disney gives us in relationship is like, you get 20 degrees of a relationship, right? But when you really get in a relationship, you start to get into the mundane domesticity of it. You start to face some contention, some contention from time to time. This is the 360 degrees you start to get of a relationship. Same thing of a person. When you meet a person for the first time, you get the 90 degrees. Spend a little more time, 180 degrees. Oh, this person all right, have a little depth. Spend a lot of time, you get the 360 degree, you get like the full, okay, I see this person now, the full circle. In order to, I think, appreciate and still love 360 of another person, you have to love and appreciate 360s of yourself, right? So, sometimes, like, I believe the cornerstone of humanity is hypocrisy, right? Like, we want certain things, certain ways, but then in some instances, you don't want that same thing for somebody else. I think what it means to be human is hypocrisy. Like, humanity in and of itself is kind of backwards in certain kind of things. Like, like certain guys want a woman to just, go ham. But that same guy may think twice about spending the rest of his life with that same woman. Women want a guy, to have abundance, right, and to be able to stable situation. And sometimes you're on that incline when you meet somebody. That same woman want to spend every waking day an hour in time with that person. So that's, it's the interesting the hypocrisies of what it means to be human. Now, one is not right or wrong. It's just they're both insightful observations that when you're on an inward journey of yourself, you get to understand, like, wow, I am hypocritical. I make mistakes. I am flawed. I have a shadow. I have darknesses. I am a fascinating person. Sometimes it's challenging to be patient, to love. Sometimes it's challenging to continue to persevere, to love. Sometimes it's challenging to exercise and be loving. Now that I know that I am this way, I can be understanding and have more compassion with another human being, who fear of the unknown manifests as racism, whose fear, manifests as frustration, whose optimism manifests as anger, You know, you can be more passionate with that person because you understand that person, because you first understand yourself. In that same instance, you can have a much more stronger relationship with humanity the more you understand your own humanity. But I think the biggest thing here with honoring agape in this segment, what I really want to capture is love, you know, especially when it's challenging, you know, loving, especially when it's just difficult. That's what agape means to Alethea and I. And that's why it's one of our family pillars. And the big message that I want to, you know, leave with you is that, but also go on that inward journey. You know, the beginning of, I think all of our family pillars kind of hit on that. Like, you know, even authenticity. Authentically who? Authentically what? It encourages you to go on that inward journey. Spiritual freedom. You know, your spiritual freedom is amazing, but what it causes me to think about is what is spiritual bondage looks like, right? That again goes on the inward journey. You know, talking with Father Cyril. Shout out to Father Cyril. Hopefully you're watching this. He and I had a discussion a couple of, I think it was a year or two ago. And I asked him, like, what is spiritual bondage? And without hesitation, he immediately said sin. You know, and I was like, wow. You know, and he gave a beautiful example of this story in the Bible where David was working with Potiphar, and his wife, Potiphar's wife, was trying to get it popping, you know, with Potiphar and with David rather, and David was, you know, declining all of her advances, and so it was one instance where she sends all the guards out of the room and, you know, like that, you know, tried to like ravish this guy, you know, and he was like, how can I sin in the eyes of God? And the observation that Father Cyril was sharing with me was that David, what he said, you know, how can I sin, you know, not undermining Potiphar's loyalty or trust, you know, not disrespecting the relationship or whatever, but really, how could I do this in the eyes of God? How I took that is that God, in the sense of our spiritual selves, you know, greater is he that is in us than he that is in the world. So like, when you understand who you are at the spiritual essence, like your spiritual ideal self, how God manifests itself in you. Like if in the same example with love, you know, 1 John 4:8 says, he who does not know love does not know God, for God is love. So the ocean is love. The ocean is God. And then we as human beings, we're the waves. You know, we're emanations of God. So each wave is a little different. You know, you got some big waves, some tidal waves, some mini waves, some little slow waves, whatever. This is how the manifestations of humanity just comes in and out of our lives. And eventually we reach that golden shore and it's all done. You know, our life is over. So it's just that long. But when the wave manifests, even at all, like the wave is not the ocean, but the wave is of the ocean. So we're not God, but we are of God, you know, like we're all emanations of God. So that's in us. And so when that instance happened with Potiphar, what came to mind was like, man, how could you sin in your own presence? How can you know who you are spiritually, know who you are, and go against who you are? I think that only happens due to fear, you know? And so out of fear of like a lack thereof, do you take jobs out of desperation or out of fear of this and the third, you're racist to somebody. Out of fear of the unknown, you do just weird shit. But when you kind of like let that fear subside and you anchor yourself in who you are, you anchor yourself in that love, you act, that is what it means to be spiritually free, right? That's what Father Steele was telling me, like that the spiritual bondage is when you go against who you truly are and you sin. Like David was like, he knows who God is, and how could he go against God in the eyes of God? How can he do anything inconsistent with God, with who he is? For me, I'm like, how can you know who you truly are and still act out of fear? You know, like you know who you are, you act out of fear. And the thing here, it goes back to the whole love gem. Like you can only be generous in your love when you have a lot of love. And so you got to just constantly exercise patience and freedom and persevere. And that's a beautiful thing. So that's the big gist here. I wanted to share with my captive audience and all of our wedding guests, the idea of love, you know, and being generous in your love, taking that inward journey, knowing who you are, be spiritually free, be authentically who you are, in love, especially when it's the most challenging to love in those instances and stuff. That is agape. Yeah. Thank you.